Ventenata is always on our mind now lately, and hopefully we just get to keep looking at pictures. So we got you didn't bring any seed with you, right? No. Okay. So we got Shannon Clark from Enview going to talk about Ventenata. Welcome.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me here and letting me talk about Ventenata for yet another year. So you guys are probably going to get sick of us, but it's important because you really don't want it. So if you weren't already asleep this morning, you will be after this talk probably. So it's okay. I won't be offended. I'm going to be focusing a lot on the ID of Ventenata and then kind of scouting options and different things. I'll go a little bit into the management. Luckily, Ventenata is fairly easy to manage in the terms that we know how to, but you definitely don't want to get it because once you get it, it's hard to keep track of all of it. So those are kind of the positives and negatives of that. So some of this might be repeat because I think Ventenata has been on the agenda for maybe the past 3 years here, but hopefully you'll get some new stuff out of it or start to just take in some of it where you'll know how to ID Ventenata if you do come across it in the field. Hopefully you don't, but it's probably likely it will get here eventually. So the reason why it is on the agenda for so many years, or why we keep bringing it back, is because it is really bad. So compare if you're familiar with cheatgrass at all, or any of our other annual grasses, if you've worked crop like jointed goat grass or feral rye, Ventenata is a lot worse in the sense that it really has no livestock or wildlife forage value. So if you get it, nothing will really graze it. And I'll show a few pictures later to show really how impactful it is to grazing. But it doesn't take a lot on the landscape or in an area to prevent grazing from occurring. It's also, I think, the fastest invasive spreader going on right now. I've never seen a plant spread as fast as Ventenata. When it first came into Sheridan County in Wyoming, it quickly went into Campbell County, the county just east of Sheridan. And I remember went out to a field tour and they had sprayed this area and they had sprayed everything they could find there. And we went out the next year for this field tour and everything around where they had sprayed was Ventenata, just as far as you could see. So it really just, it sneaks in where you don't, it's kind of undetected and then it just explodes given the right environmental conditions. So it got into the Great Plains ecoregion and it just started spreading like wildfire. And then bringing up wildfire, it does produce a lot of dry litter on the surface, and so that does spread wildfire more, just like all of our invasive annual grasses like cheatgrass and things like that. I know that's not as much of a problem in North Dakota, but this is one that could definitely spread through North Dakota given its characteristics. It reduces the diversity of the landscape in terms of our native plants, and definitely impacts our rangeland health systems like carbon storage and nutrient cycling. And then I already mentioned the forage piece. So like I said, livestock will not graze Ventenata. And so this is a picture of a site where there was grazing going on. And these are clumps of Ventenata that were actually just spit out by cattle grazing the site. So they got this, get it in their mouth and they'll just spit it out. And so, this site's pretty inundated because this is all Ventenata here. You wouldn't expect cows to graze this, but even an infestation of maybe 10% cover on the landscape, cattle will start avoiding the area. And so what happens is they're not going to pick through this site and try to get the perennial grass in here. I mean, they just simply can't do that, but they'll just go to the riparian areas or areas that are not infested. They'll hang out there and overuse those sites. So this is just showing the silica content in some of these different annual grasses and then some of our native perennial grasses. But the reason why cattle won't graze it is because of the high silica content. So if you look at Ventenata, 8.9%, so it is the highest out of all of our annual grass species. And then compared to some of our natives, like, under 4%. And then cheatgrass, which cows will eat before it, dries out and gets that seed head on it. it's even lower, the 2.9%. So this is the reason why cattle don't graze Ventenata. And so you really can't even kind of coax them into it or force them to. They just simply won't eat it. Um, this is some stuff out of the University of Wyoming. I thought it really interesting in terms of looking at forage quality, and then I'll show quantity next. But what they did was, I know it's really early in the morning for looking at figures like this, and sometimes there's a little hard to read. But I just wanted to show the crude protein content when you have an Ventenata invaded landscape versus Ventenata free landscape. And so the yellow is going to be that Ventenata invaded landscape. So we see the protein content in the site really start tanking off during the summer and then into the fall, where our perennial grass dominated site stays much higher. It doesn't really matter even if Ventenata had high crude protein because they want to eat it anyways, but you are impacting that source. You're going to end up supplementing, you're going to end up having to graze other sites. So you have that kind of impact. Also, our total digestible nutrients, you see that is, the lines are similar in terms of how they decline over the season, but you remain at a much higher TDN level in a site that's dominated by perennial grasses compared to your Ventenata site. So again, when you're talking about having to supplement or things like that, when you're grazing these sites, the perennial grass site, you might end up not even having to supplement over a Ventenata site. We're going to be in a mess. When we look at this is quantity of grass. So we're looking at annual grass biomass. So of course the treated site down here in brown, there is none really because our treatment was effective. And we have a lot of annual grass biomass in the non-treated site. When we look over here, this is more what I wanted to show, the perennial grass biomass through the course of the season. We have much higher forage quantity in terms of like pounds per acre in our treated site compared to our Ventenata invaded site. So it really takes over that perennial grass that we have. It starts replacing that with the Ventenata. So again, you're just impacting your forage quantity, your forage quality, and just the general health of your rangeland if you let Ventenata persist. So driving all of that into just making the point of why you don't want Ventenata here. So it's great to come to a state that doesn't have it and talk about Ventenata compared to a lot of these talks that I'm doing in states that already have so much of it and have to put so many resources into managing it. So we're going to spend a lot of time on ID just so you can start getting an idea of what it looks like and hopefully being able to detect it when it does get here. It's really hard to do this in a PowerPoint, so it's a great place to start, but I do encourage you if you're on that like Western North Dakota side, that's where we'd anticipate seeing it first come into the state, that you go to maybe like a workshop or something in another state and look at it actually in the field. Because once you get your eye trained in the field, it's much easier to ID. It's really hard just looking at pictures and then trying to find it on the landscape. But this is a great sheet the University of Wyoming has made. They have a group called Imagine, which is the Institute for Managing Annual Grasses Invading Natural Ecosystems. So Imagine's the acronym. You can access it at invasivegrasses.com. It's a great website that they have going with tons of resources, but this sheet's on there and it actually shows you the ID on several winter annual grass species. So you got like your cheatgrass, your Japanese brome, Medusa head, which is another awful one that we don't want. It just hasn't quite had the rate of spread Ventenata's had. And then of course you have your Ventenata. So in terms of ID, there's a few things that do make it easy to ID if you do have a sample to look at in the field. The biggest thing is, and what I look for are they'll have this black node. And then this really long ligule. So if you pull that leaf back, you'll see that long ligule just sticking out there. That's one way to really look for if it has these two characteristics. So you want to check that out if you do have a specimen you think, okay, this might be Ventenata. I'd look for those first. In the seedling stage, it's very hard to ID, but one thing is that it is completely hairless. So unlike your cheatgrass or your Japanese brome, those bromes have a lot of hairs on them. It is hairless. And it is kind of this yellow, like lime green color when it does start growing. Um, when it's mature, it is an open panicle. So again, if you're familiar with those brome species like cheatgrass or Japanese brome, it kind of nods down and it's not going to be an open panicle like this when you hold it up. Um, Another thing is when it is mature, it's going to have these bent awns. So I usually look for the nodes and the ligules, and then I look if it does have a seed head and it is mature, that it has this bend in this awn. That's like a really critical ID way you can ID it as well. And then as that plant does get drier towards the end of the season, that awn is twisted as well. So it's pretty, once you see it in person, you're like, okay, this doesn't look really like anything else, mostly anything else. So it's pretty easy to tell. But that bent awn is very characteristic of it. You just have to wait till it gets kind of at that senesce time of the season, like July or something, before you start seeing that. So I wanted to show kind of how this progresses on the landscape, because if it is like cheatgrass where it will start green and then it senesces early on in the season, although a little bit later than cheatgrass. So there is a kind of a window where Ventenata will still be green in about a couple weeks generally, and cheatgrass has already turned that like purple brown color. Um, but in the spring, this is what it looks like. If you can't see it in these pictures, that's why I put them here because it's very hard on the landscape to drive by a site in the spring and be able to pick out Ventenata. You'd have to be walking around. But it is in here. It's kind of like a little bit different, like yellowy green color compared or lime green color compared to our a lot of our native perennials that we have or just desirable perennials on the landscape. So here it's kind of up close. You can pick out the heads of the Ventenata here. This is all Ventenata in smooth brome. And so a little bit easier if you are walking out in the field, but still kind of hard to see if it was new or you didn't know what to quite look for. So Ventenata in summer, we start to get a little bit easier to see. So generally, I would say it changes depending on the environmental conditions, but by July, it's at this stage, like early to mid-July, it starts to turn. So it turns to like a yellowish tan color, and it is different than cheatgrass. And like cheatgrass kind of gets that purple phase, and then it turns to a really tan or brown color, I would say. Ventenata is lighter. I would call it more of like a blondish color generally. This kind of looks tan in this picture, but it's pretty blonde on the landscape. Um, so July to August, the plant senesce. That's when those awns become twisted and bent and it produces a large amount of that dry litter you can see, and that's what makes it flammable and spreads those fires quicker. So I think this picture is pretty good at terms of seeing what it looks like if you looked across the landscape. It's almost like a hazy look that will exist. You'll look out and you'll see something that's just very blonde and looks kind of hazy. That's how it looks to me at least. And I think this picture is pretty good. Um, here it is as well. Looks more a little tan in that picture. I think this one, I don't know why the quality is so bad, but I wanted to include it because this is really classic. You'll oftentimes see it going down like the coulees. Like it starts, unlike cheatgrass, like in the wetter areas, and usually spreads out from there. We'll see a good landscape picture next of how that looks, but you can see how hazy it looks. So you'll see like that green perennial grass and that hazy blonde color. And it will start out really patchy, so you might just have small patches of this and then eventually spreads throughout. So there is one look-alike species. Fortunately, I don't think you actually have this species, but I wanted to just throw it up anyways because maybe just no one has found it. It is in Montana, annual hairgrass. But when I looked at the like EdMaps even last night, has never been reported in North Dakota as far as I could tell. That doesn't mean you couldn't have it. So just to be aware that there is this, and it's a pretty good look-alike. So there's a few difference. There's two florets per spikelet on annual hairgrass, where Ventenata will have three. And then those red or black nodes that I was talking about on the stem, that's only going to be on Ventenata. So that's a good indication to look for between the two species. But just know, and it's not really that important that you ID hairgrass versus ventenata. Just be aware that there can be lookalikes. But if you find something that even remotely looks like ventenata in your mind, send it in to the state and someone can ID it there for you. So again, here's the annual hairgrass. Here's those two spikelets, and then that you have the twisted and bent on ventenata. So a few ways you can tell the difference. But more just to make you aware, there can be lookalikes. So yeah, again, just send it in for ID. So what's the current distribution look like? EdMaps, I did notice is for a long time this had not been updated. I guess people were just not reporting their Ventenata findings to EdMaps, but it is actually getting better. So it's a lot more accurate, but it's not completely accurate. So not everyone's reported it in their county. But Ventenata really started here in the Pacific Northwest, so that Washington, Oregon area, about the 1950s is when it really was reported and started to be noticed as a problem. And then it started spreading east, but it kind of stayed in that area for a long time. Then we had the first report, well, kind of the first report in Sheridan County in 2016. I guess it had been reported to the herbarium there. No one had reported it to like someone as being a problem. They had just submitted a sample about 20 years before that. But in 2016 is when they started noticing it on the landscape. So that year, so right here in Sheridan, they found Medusa head and Ventenata in the same year. Started a big scouting project and realized they had a lot more than they thought. So they kind of created a containment zone instead of an eradication plan at that point. But since then, we've just seen it trucking east. Then it was found in Campbell County. Now Campbell County's has tons of it. I think they're spraying 20,000 acres a year plus of Ventenata. And then in 2000, I think 2022, it was found in South Dakota. So that was the first instance in that state. But this is a map provided by the University of Wyoming. They're much better at maintaining where it's been reported. So you can see it's on your border of like right here in Montana, as well as in South Dakota there. So be on the lookout because it's just right there. And it's pretty far north in the South Dakota County, and it's pretty far east in this county of Montana that goes right into Bowman County. So that's why I say it hasn't been found here yet, but it's likely that it will eventually just move into that area. So like I said, Wyoming did set up a containment zone when they found it. Well, when they found it, they were trying to eradicate it, but then quickly moved to containment because they realized they had a lot more than what they thought. This was their containment zone in red. The green is their Medusa head containment. They've done pretty good on Medusa head, but these spots represent all the Ventenata that they've found outside. And this map is a little old, so there's more than that as well. So they haven't been successful in containing it. They've done a lot of treatments. It's not for lack of trying. It's just that it's very hard to contain once it gets into a place. And then it went over into South Dakota from here. So there's a group called Inhabit. They're in out at Fort Collins, Colorado. It's they put these species model maps together based on where the species been reported and environmental conditions, and kind of look at where there might be suitable habitat for a species. So this is looking at the Ventenata one. The brighter like yellow green color is going to be very high suitable habitat, where like the dark blue black is going to be low suitability. So when we look at North Dakota, kind of the eastern side of the state's not showing like that the habitat would be that suitable for Ventenata. But when we look in that corner down here, where we do know we have it on the border, you can see there is some green color there. So there is showing suitable habitat. It's not as bright as maybe this Montana and Wyoming region, but this is where Ventenata already exists. So we have reported incidences, what makes it a little bit easier to get the habitat figured out. So these models aren't, like don't live and die by these models, but they're more just helpful to say, okay, this is where we might want to focus our efforts on looking for Ventenata if it is going to come into North Dakota. Okay, so here is what it looks like on the landscape. So this is Sheridan County, just an aerial view of Ventenata. And so it's all the brown you're seeing in this picture pretty much is Ventenata. So you can just see how it looks. You can see that perennial grass, but then you see just those patches everywhere of brown. This is obviously a very infested site, not a new infestation, but it quickly got to this point. It wasn't, it didn't take a couple decades. It quickly moved into this state within, maybe 5 years or less on the landscape. And then here's like a classic Ventenata look, because you can see it's following all these draws here. So it kind of starts in those wetter areas. And I see that all the time when I'm out. Like it will follow those wetter areas and then it just starts invading into the rest of the rangeland. And so it's kind of opposite of cheatgrass because cheatgrass likes dry and you generally wouldn't see it in these wetter draws. So it kind of does the opposite. And then another great characteristic of Ventenata is that it will just overrun cheatgrass from a site. So if it invades a site that already has cheatgrass, they exist together, but it also just can take over and just outcompete cheatgrass. And so then you're left with even something less desirable. Um, a lot going on. I'm just going to show. So with annual grasses, especially when we talk about cheatgrass, we've kind of been in this reactive stage. Now this isn't North Dakota because you guys don't have a lot of problems with cheatgrass, but when you go directly west of North Dakota, obviously cheatgrass is a huge issue, like probably the number one invasive that's fought in the Western US. And we're a lot of times in this reactive state. Sites are already really invaded. We're already seeing the consequences of a depleted ecosystem, loss of forage, things like that. But I just wanted to point out, you have the chance to be in this proactive state in North Dakota. So that's great because you haven't even found Ventenata yet. So that's why it's so important to be on the look for it when it gets here and to actually do something about it when it does get here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a lot about scouting. So how do you find when it gets here? Where do you start? So there's some great tools available that really make it easy where you don't have to be boots on the ground everywhere. You can actually utilize some digital tools to do your scouting for you, which is great because you can even do it in the middle of winter from your office. So remote sensing has really improved, I'd say, in the last 5 years to give us a lot more accurate and reliable data. And so there's several tools that are available in terms of looking for annual grasses on the landscape with digital tools. So there's some free ones that are more of a landscape-wide assessment. These are great places to start. I would say scouting Ventenata, North Dakota, that would not be a place to start because they're just not going to give you that fine scale. But in terms of just looking at you can look at perennial grass on the landscape, you can look at annual grasses. You can start there with some of these assessments. I would say for free tools, EdMaps is a great place to start for Ventenata because you can see where it's been reported around you. And that can kind of focus your areas on where you're going to look in your area in terms of scouting. So that's probably like your best option to start with for Ventenata. And then you move to this like project regional level assessment. And so we have a tool called RangeView, and it has a 3.7 meter resolution for satellite imagery. It uses kind of on the ground data of like site specific information like slope, weather, distance to water, things like that to look for these annual grasses specifically by species and give you that image result. And so this is one you can actually use to scout for Ventenata right from the computer. So we're going to go through kind of what that might look like. So for RangeView, there are several available models for specific species. So this will give you specific species results where those free tools generally lump annual grasses together, or it could just be annual species together, all in one group. Where RangeView, you can actually say, look for Ventenata, look for cheatgrass, look for Medusa head. You can specify what you're looking for. You can say, look for all three, and it will give you different maps for each species. Also of interest, because if you're sitting through this presentation and you're on the eastern side of North Dakota, you might not be too worried about Ventenata. But there is a leafy spurge model in RangeView, so that is another thing you could use the mapping tool for if you want to kind of map some areas instead of having to scout everything out on the ground. It's a huge labor savings for sure. So I just wanted to show the difference between a free tool versus what RangeView would provide in terms of accuracy. So this is looking at the rangeland analysis platform annual, and then it's lumping all annual species together. So you can see the more red, the more annuals we have. We do have a lot of annual species going on in this area. This is in Sheridan, Wyoming, so we know it is annual grasses. But here's the map provided by RangeView. So it can specifically pick out Ventenata, and it can give us this kind of a heat map. So where the green really has low cover or no to low cover, the yellow is moderate, and then the red is high cover. So you get a lot more helpful information when you get that fine scale resolution. So like I said, it also has species level detection. So I wanted to show just an example of this is a site, customer had us run where this shows all the annual grasses lumped together at the site. So we could see we have really high cover at the site of all annual grasses. But when you look at the Ventenata only model, you can see it's mostly that southern half of the pasture that's predominantly Ventenata. When we switch to Medusa head, so this site is lucky to have 3 invasive annual grass species, but you can see Medusa head, different pattern, kind of more invading that north area where the Ventenata wasn't. When we look at cheatgrass only, it's really kind of at that southern part of the pasture. So we really know that the Medusa head's the one kind of in the northern part, and the Ventenata is predominantly in the southern half of the pasture. For treatment for this, it doesn't really matter. You would kind of just take the all annual grasses model, but I wanted to show because for you probably don't care as much right now where cheatgrass is on the landscape. You really want to know where the Ventenata is, and the model can tell you that. It can specifically pick out Ventenata over cheatgrass. So how do you get started with RangeView? It's really easy. You can go online, you can make a free account if you just want to play around with the tool, if you're just kind of interested in seeing what it is, what it has to offer. We can also walk you through this as well. But you can make a free account. You can look at NDVI imagery right on there. We're building in the rangeland analysis platform tool to bring in there as well. So you can use some of these free tools and just look at your site. And then you're able to order your analysis right from there. So how you do that is you'd create your polygon of your area that you're interested in looking at or scouting. Like in this case, if you're scouting for Ventenata, you could draw a polygon around all the areas you're interested in scouting. If you already have those drawn, like say you went out with a GPS unit and made a file that way, or used Onyx Hunt and walked your polygon that way, you can export right into this or import, sorry, right into this program, those files. So you don't have to redraw. So you can use the NDVI tool, like I said. So here's just an example of using the NDVI where you'd see in this pasture. Well, we don't have a lot of areas with great perennial grasses going on. A lot of it is void of those. And then you can choose your analysis at this point. So if you click the Analyze button, it's going to pull up all these species you have the option of ordering an analysis for. So we've got a leafy spurge over here, or you can order those individual annual grass species, or you could order all 3 annual grass species. And then your analysis will come back to you, generally I think within a week, and you'll get a map like this where it will highlight the areas where it detected that species of interest. Hopefully for you, it'd be all green if you were trying to detect Ventenata, but this, it would give you an idea. So if it did come back with some red or yellow, that's where you would go out, obviously on the ground, look for it, confirm, yes, it's Ventenata or no. Sometimes it can get it wrong, but it does have a very high accuracy rate, the highest in the industry. There's really not any other commercially available tools that do this. So it's been very accurate, especially with Ventenata. And then if you are planning a treatment, you can actually plan your treatment right in this program. You could draw your polygon around where you want to treat, send that right to your applicator or right to your whatever you're using for an application guidance software. So I did want to also point out that Ventenata scouting has been going on in North Dakota. It's mostly been on the ground scouting for the last 2 summers, but Jared and Bill have gone out and just scouted not only North Dakota, but South Dakota, because they've, Jared found it there first, and then they found it in more areas after that. But they've gone up these border counties, knowing that it's probably going to come in from the borders, scouting. So all the border counties except for Divide, and then Billings as well. And the county weed managers have been great about assisting with that, those scouting trips each summer. New populations have been found in South Dakota each year, but so far no populations detected in North Dakota, so that's good. And then watching Bowman County for sure, as it's bordering two counties that do have Ventenata, and it's not that far away from the border. So yeah, that's probably the target, I would say, for North Dakota to watch, that in Slope County. So what tools, I do want to go quickly through the management of Ventenata just to let you know how it is managed. So what tools do we have? Herbicides are really the only effective option. And I'm not just saying that because we sell herbicides. It really is the only effective option on these annual grass species to get any longevity of control. We can't use grazing. Like, people have managed cheatgrass, not great, but you can kind of manage it with grazing. Can't with Ventenata because they just won't eat it. But you can use those tools in conjunction with herbicides. So you can still have an integrative approach to your pest management. If you do have Ventenata, you could use grazing to kind of reduce some of that like litter or thatch on the surface before herbicide application. Not that the cows are going to graze a lot of the Ventenata out, but get some of that just grass out of the landscape. You can use manual removal. So you could mow an area or do something like that to, again, remove that litter before herbicide application. We want to get the herbicide to the soil. That's important. And burning would probably be the best way to remove that litter off the surface. And prescribed burning is a little easier in North Dakota than, where we're at, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. People are scared to burn because we're scared of it getting out of control. Where, because you're a little wetter here, I think more prescribed burning goes on. And that could have other benefits for your perennials as well. So those tools can be used in conjunction, but really herbicides are the only effective method at actually getting some control in the landscape. Fortunately, we do have a really effective herbicide. So Rejuvra, if you've heard of it, it's also Esplanade for the VM space, so our roadside and bare ground application sites. They're the same product. It's very effective on these winter annual grasses. They're very sensitive to low rates. So it's used at 3.5 to 7 ounces per acre, but 5 ounces per acre is our standard annual grass treatment rate. It's a pre-germination herbicide, which means it does need to be in the soil and incorporated with moisture. We say about 1/2 inch of moisture before it's activated in the soil and before that plant starts to germinate. It is a unique mode of action for range and pasture and roadside use. It's a cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor, and we don't have any other cellulose biosynthesis inhibitors in these spaces of range and pasture. And then it provides safety to our perennials because it does stay in the top part of the soil, and our perennial roots are below that. And so we've seen great safety on all of our perennial species. In terms of control, just real quick, this is combining 10 studies we did across 6 states on all the annual grass species. So we had Ventenata, Medusa head, cheatgrass, Japanese brome, all in these studies. Over 90% control at that 4th summer after treatment. Plateau's kind of been the standard annual grass treatment before Rejuvra, and it is it's great for a year or two maybe, but then it's very short-lived. So we see Rejuvra just really starting to deplete that annual grass seed bank and get to that longevity of control. Application timing, it's really important if you are using Rejuvra to know about this application timing and how we want to get it out. So if you're only going with Rejuvra, we do want to get it out in that May to June timeframe so we can get some moisture incorporated before these annual grass species do germinate in the fall. It sounds really early to go out in May or June, but it just is because generally it can get dry in July and August, and then you won't get that moisture in time. If you do hit that July timeframe, so July to November, you can still go out, and we add something like Plateau or Laramie. Laramie hasn't been used as much. Most of our treatments have been the Plateau Rejuva combo, but because North Dakota is so dominated by smooth brome, especially, and I know a lot of people are trying to get rid of that here, and then if that's your only forage, you do want to keep it. So Plateau can definitely injure smooth brome. Um, What's great is we can go out at low rates. So we've adjusted down to even 3 ounces per acre, which provides more safety to that smooth brome. We still get the Ventenata, and then the Rejuvas in the soil to control it for the next several years. But you do have the option to use Laramie, and that's been very effective on Ventenata as well. So I'd say, a little more safety on that smooth brome. But yeah, just 2 ounces of Laramie has been very effective at getting post-emergent control. So here's an example of both of those post-emergent partners with the Rejuva. So here's your non-treated. This is all the Ventenata. We had about 85% cover at the site. It was very infested. Here's the spray. This is the Plateau Rejuva combo. This was sprayed in August timeframe. So we had very, very effective control. This is 2 years after. And then there's that Rejuva and the Laramie. And so you can see very effective control there as well. You can pretty much use anything label equipment to apply this. So aerial's been most of our application methods, helicopter or fixed wing, depending on where you're at, and what the terrain is that you're working with. But ground application, definitely. If you do use a UTV sprayer, boom is better. But if you go with boomless, you just really need to calibrate because boomless you can get skips or you just have uneven distribution more often. Speaking of uneven distribution and bad application, you do need to use a certified applicator or a qualified applicator, one that's familiar with Rejuva. We do have a top flight program that we put applicators through to train them on making sure their equipment's correct that they're using and that they're putting the right gallons per acre down and all that kind of stuff. So you can avoid costly mistakes like this. But when we do have good applications, you can see great control on the landscape. I have a couple of these to show the line. It really stays where it's put. So you can see these really good lines on the landscape when you put it out. Here's another one. I like this because you can see this was a research trial that University of Wyoming did in the middle of this pasture, and you can pick it out from a helicopter. So I just wanted to kind of throw around some ideas to get you to start thinking about actually finding some funding for scouting. And so Rangery does have a cost simply because we have a cost to actually obtain that satellite imagery at that high resolution. And so thinking about grant funding is a great place to start bringing partners together and maybe identifying some areas like border areas that are close to known infestations where you can start scouting. There's a lot of money out there right now going through grants going towards annual grass management. Not as much for the scouting side, but there is funding available for scouting. And so I just encourage you to look for that, get the interested partners together at the table and kind of start pursuing some of that funding. If you are in one of those border counties and want to look at using some of the imagery for scouting, on the ground scouting is also great too. Especially in areas where you really are concerned about it coming in. But using those digital tools is a great place to start. And then the last thing I want to end with is just I brought up Imagine early in the talk, but they're really a great resource based out of that Sheridan area run by the University of Wyoming, but several partners are involved with the Imagine group, including several universities, NRCS, a bunch of federal agencies. And so they have a lot of good educational programs. So one are these workshops that they do. And so the virtual workshop you can just do right online, which is a great place to start to get some more in-depth information about these annual grass species. Then they do these field workshops. And this is a great time to get out there and see the species in the field. So if you have the ability to maybe travel to do one of these workshops, especially if you want to get a grip on what Ventenata looks like in the field, I encourage you to attend. Here's the dates for this year. So that workshop the Zoom workshop is on April 2nd. It's free to attend, so I just really encourage you, invasivegrasses.com. If you want to learn really in-depth knowledge about these grasses, including Ventenata, sign up for that. Then the level 2 workshops where you can actually go out on the field and see it. They have a couple in June. Last year they did one in Sheridan, which would be a lot closer to here, but this year it's Idaho and Nevada. So kind of some hard places to get to from North Dakota. But if you're interested in traveling, want a vacation to one of the, the lovely place of Elko, Nevada, then sign up and go to one of those. In terms of what our team offers, we do offer technical assistance with all of these tools, including our Rejuva herbicide. We can help you develop like landscape scale projects, find grant opportunities. If you want to hold meetings, say you want to bring this ID stuff to maybe your local county and bring in some ranchers to kind of spread awareness. We do that kind of stuff as well. And anything with grants, we can really help you with like the providing language for the grant writing, to assistance to finding what grants might qualify. And so with that, glad they gave me some extra time this morning, and I will take any questions if there are any. Yes. Yeah, the Rangeview website, it's a weird one because it's not just rangeview.com. Let me get back to it's rangeview.nview.us. Yeah, and if you Google search Rangeview, it's not like the top result. So we're trying to work on that, but that's how you can get there. So or if you go to our NView website, you can also find Rangeview, the link to Rangeview from there. And if you stop by our booth out there, we have information on Rangeview as well. I mean, this will pick it out once you get a patch that's about 3 meters. So which happens quickly. So if you got one plant on the landscape, Rangy isn't going to find it. It does need to be in a patch, but that patch will happen quickly. So it kind of depends. Like if you're a county weed manager, Rangy might be a great place to start if you maybe find some grant support and say, I want to scan, identify the most critical areas to scan. If you're a landowner, like a rancher or something, maybe you want to start just on the ground in some areas that you think disturbed areas I would check. Like I said, those coulees or like areas like that where it starts first. And you're out there anyways with your cows. So I'd just be scanning all the time. Like, just keep that in the back of your mind all the time when you're out there working cows or moving cows around. But if you are interested in really checking your whole ranch, I mean, Rangeview could be a starting place as well. So kind of depends on what you're funding or, what budget you have to spend, how much land you're talking about. But Rangeview isn't a complete substitution for on the ground. We still want to be on the ground looking for these things because that's where we're gonna, eventually find it. Yeah, and then like you said, you can send that into Fargo. If you do have anything if you have any question in your mind about something you find, if you think it might be Ventenata, just send it in. Oh, Rangeview. So right now it identifies 3 annual grass species. There's 3 brush species. I think we do have the ability to do eastern red cedar or cedar species as well. And then leafy spurge is the only broadleaf species at this point. Yeah. Yeah, is there anything that will graze it? Not that I'm aware of. So even like sometimes we can get sheep and stuff to goats to graze more. Goats might graze it a little more, but I don't think anyone's been too successful in you like trying to train them to graze it. Like you can kind of get them to eat thistles or other things like that. I don't think they'll readily graze it. So really, yeah, nothing grazes it as far as I know, and I don't think anyone's been successful in trying to train them to do it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's what I've been told at least. So is the silica is really the driving factor in why animals will not graze it. I'm not an animal scientist, so I'm not quite sure all the science behind that, but that's at least what's been speculated on why they won't graze Ventenata or Medusa head as well, because it's very, very high. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so the seed, there's not too many great studies on seed viability of Ventenata, but everything that's been done gives us the indication it's less than 5 years. It's very similar to like a cheatgrass seed viability. So 1 to 2 applications of Rejuva can deplete the seed bank. Oftentimes, when you do see it come back in, it's reinvading from outside of the property. But it definitely, that's the great thing about Rejuva is it works on the seed bank. So I would say 1 to 2 applications generally to deplete it. Yeah, Rejuva does have soil residual and it has a lengthy soil residual. And so we'll see for 3, 4+ years of control with one application. So it does stay in the soil. It doesn't persist at high rates in the soil that long, but grass species are just so sensitive to it that it continues to provide control.